Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Polities Podcast. We're so happy to have you here, and I'm happy to be here with Reuben Slife.
Thank
Reuben,
you.
We are selling you a book. Now, we thought maybe we would subtly work that pitch into a longer discussion about the themes of the book, but then we thought, you know what? You're honest people. You're good-looking people. You're busy people. You've got only so much time, so we're just going to say it like it is. You should buy this book.
It's a good book.
It's a very good book. The book, Modernity's Alternative. How History is Formed in the Depths of the People by Rocco Buttiglione.
With an introduction by Pope Francis.
You may have heard of him. And an afterword by our own Andrew Willard Jones. So, as far as I can tell, if you have no other reason to buy a book, the fact that we have these three people collaborating to produce this object seems to me to be of world historical importance.
And look at that cover.
It is pretty good. I'm very proud of it. You did great. Reuben has been all over this thing.
I did not make the cover.
But he was instrumental. I remember the day when he came in and was like, this book is rock and roll. This book is almost metal. And it needs to be both in its titling and its visual appearance. It needs to have the sense of the complexity and just the straight to the heart nature of a hardcore metal song, which, if you know Reuben, is not something he usually says. So I was like, he must be right. But all of this doesn't tell you anything about the book.
No, it doesn't.
So maybe the best place to start, Reuben, is for me to ask you this. New polity here. We just published a book called Modernity's Alternative. Reuben, what is the alternative to modernity?
First, the alternative to modernity is something we all would like.
I was just thinking that when I woke up this morning. If only there was something else.
I think normally when people are sitting around bemoaning modernity, they think of the alternative as being the past.
Yeah.
Totally. But obviously the past is not real. The past used to be real, and it's not there anymore. And there are plenty of things about modernity we all like, as everyone. The example everyone always gives is modern medicine. So you don't wish to just go back to the past and lose a lot of things in any way you couldn't do it if you wanted to. Buttiglione's argument is that modernity sort of began twice. And there's the beginning we all think of with Descartes and the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment and all of that, going on to Karl Marx and you know what you see in the 20th century and now. And then there's even earlier one, he says, an earlier beginning in the discovery of America, where the Catholic Church, first of all, discovers that there's this entire race of people, many races of people, different cultures in an entire continent we didn't know about that had never received the gospel, that was not part of our world, our society, and had to figure out how to deal with that. And so the Catholic Church had to figure out how to deal with complexity, that there's us, so that these people who are different, but we're all human. Right. So how you have a unity within things that are actually different. Not just the differences interior to Europe, which are kind of grown up with time, like branches on a tree, but something that's just unexpected. But you still have to say in faith, as the popes did, these are human beings. They are us. We are like them, but it's not clear how. And trying to bridge that gap. So you get an entirely different form of modernity as coming to grips with the differences.
Yeah, and what does he say makes that modernity, that whole experience, a sort of beginning of a distinct modernity? Because I think most people would say, well, sure, it's such a earth-shattering and paradigm-shifting event. You can see why it's the beginning of a brand new worldview, which could justify making a line and say, well, everything before that was not modernity. But why an alternative modernity? Why not just incorporate that into all the various other movements and motions that we, like you said, associate with Enlightenment and Renaissance in Western Europe, and then ultimately our society today?
Well, there's the fact that the modernity that we're used to, the Enlightenment modernity, is distinctly not Christian. It's trying to leave behind the past and the sense of the meaning of the world that had been developed in all history up to that point, because the Catholic Church, of course, had taken up all the Greek inheritance and that sort of thing. So the church gathered up in herself everything that had come before. And then the Enlightenment said, no, we don't want that. We want to start history over.
Right.
And in some sense, the discovery of the New World is a starting of history over, because the church in Europe had to reconsider the idea that they were just the history of the world.
Yeah.
The history of the world was fundamentally different than we had thought it was. Mm-hmm. But without making it over into something completely other, as the Enlightenment had done. Throw all of that out.
Yeah.
And in one way, the discovery of the New World played into the Enlightenment thing, because you have all of these new peoples with their different visions of the world and outlooks and moral senses and all this. And so you could use that to say, what we had in Europe is just contingent and we cooked something up. And so now we have to move beyond our limited parochial thing to reason. We have to find pure reason and think it all out anew. But the Catholic Church instead evangelized the natives, and not by making them Spanish. I mean, there was a little bit of that, certainly, especially earlier on, but she allowed the natives to be themselves and to be their own people, their own culture, and to have Christianity come into that and come up sort of from within that. And so you end up with a Catholic modernity that takes the fact of the difference, that it's not all just one thing, that takes up the fact of the unexpected newness and lets it be there, but also lets it be in continuity with what came before.
Yeah. Yeah, and this seems to go to the subtitle, How History is Formed in the Depths of the People, where I think what becomes very apparent in what Buttiglione characterizes as Enlightenment modernity, which we see especially obviously in North America and in Western Europe, you have the loss, and sometimes a very deliberate loss, of the concept of the people. Not just as a concept, of course, but in some ways, in fact, the idea that there are peoples who operate together, who have a charity, who have a love for each other, and who have a sense of their own being as having a history. Obviously, that's precisely what gets swept away as ignorant, really, as the Enlightened modernity turns to the elevation of the individual and the contractual relationship, so that peoples become this sort of thing that you may or may not enter into, but it always doesn't really penetrate to the depths of a person.
Well, and one thing that can be said there is, what we do here at New Polity is political theology, and the people is sort of a basic concept of politics in a lot of ways. I mean, even here in the United States, we have famously, we the people.
That's us.
And yet the concept does take on a different meaning in the Enlightenment, where it becomes a what would you call it? An agglomeration of a bunch of individuals into a whole. It becomes a numerical thing, and like you just add it up into the people. And so it kind of becomes, when you say we the people, you mean something like all of us, the free individuals who made our rational choices, banded together and said, no, this is the rational thing. I mean, it's related to social contract theory and all of that. But as you said, there's the difference between that and this really ancient sense of me being part of a unity that pre-exists me and has a history that defines me and within which I operate. Yeah. And that starts getting lost in Enlightenment modernity, even as it starts to substitute a different concept for the people.
And if we could, I think, on that basis, just anticipate you buying the book and reading it, you would find that Buttiglione making the argument that not only has the concept and the respect for the people, a people as the subject that receives evangelization, not only is that present, especially he focuses on Latin America, but present in our modernity. So like in the sense of in the present moment,
right?
There are actual peoples living differently and consciously out of a sense of being a people, and the church is relating to that. So that's the first thing to say is like, often when you read these things, they become utopian because the question is, how do we imagine a better world? And what's really unique about Buttiglione, he's not saying that. He's saying, let's look at a way that it is actually presently being done differently. And of course, this goes to the whole, frankly, a crisis within the church right now, where the shift has occurred away from Western Europe and away from North America in terms of where the church is. Not to say that we're not Catholics here by any extent, but to say that obviously just by numbers, by the growth of the faith, by conversions, where there is that continuity of the sense of being a people, what Buttiglione calls Catholic modernity, there you also see a vibrant faith that isn't embattled with secularism, that isn't always trying to defend itself on purely secular grounds. So all of which is to say that when Buttiglione offers an alternative, he's also pointing to a real theological movement that occurred in South America. That was already present, but really came to consciousness in the 20th century, late 20th century, with a group of theologians, including Pope Francis.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's part of the goodness of this book, and a part of the reason why you should buy it, I can't believe you haven't bought it yet, please, is that I think Buttiglione does a great service in this book to understanding the church, in the contemporary church, what we are up to right now, and what our head, the vicar of Christ right now, sees, what he understands to be the crisis, what he understands to be the situation of the church today, because he's coming from this experience of theology that gets called theology of people, or theology of peoples. And so perhaps this would be a good time to talk about why Rocco Buttiglione knows this, and who he is, and how he has a sort of privy insight both into theology of peoples, into Catholic modernity, and into what the church is up to today. So who is this man?
Rocco Buttiglione is, he's Italian, as you might guess from the name. He wrote the book in Spanish, though. He's a polyglot. I've personally heard him speak to people in, English, German, Italian, Spanish, and Polish. And he, as you might guess from the Polish, he knew John Paul II. He tells me he met him first before John Paul was Pope, and when he himself was a very young man. And he said, of course, John Paul didn't know who I was, but I certainly knew who he was back then before he was elected. And he, back in 1982, wrote a book on John Paul's thought. It was the first book actually written on John Paul's pre-papal philosophical writings. It's been translated into English as The Thought of Karl Wojtyła, the man who became John Paul II, I believe is the title. And he knew John Paul throughout his papacy and worked with him on various things, is my understanding. And he, before that, he was a philosopher. He was a student of Augusto del Noce, a famous Italian philosopher. Many of you may be familiar with. Studied relationship between history and philosophy. And
notably, I think, not to go down the rabbit hole of del Noce, but with New Polity, as we engage in critiques of modern culture, of capitalism, etc., we often have people send us emails like, you got to read del Noce. And the reason for that connection seems to be that del Noce sees a unity in what's otherwise often opposed, namely Marxism, capitalism, communism, and liberal democracy. He sees a sort of thread of unity, which is, I think, where you can see Buttiglione seeing a particular form of enlightenment, modernity, that can comprehend all those otherwise warring factions within it. But so yeah, that's where he comes from, is from that school.
Yes, and so as I say, he was one of del Noce's students, and then after del Noce's death, he edited several of his posthumous volumes, and he ended up becoming a politician. If memory serves, it was actually John Paul who talked him into that, said we need more people in politics who are Christians and no philosophy and that sort of thing. So he served in the Italian parliament in both houses at different times, I believe, for 24 years. And on one occasion was actually nominated to be part of the European Commission, which is basically like the cabinet for the EU. And I can't recall now all the details of that. I don't know if he was ever actually got into the cabinet, but he was at any point, either way, he was either his nomination was quashed before he got in, or he was thrown out shortly after he got in, because he was Catholic.
Yeah.
And they started grilling him on what he thought about same-sex marriage and what he thought marriage was and all of that. And he told them. One sentence I've run across was that he said that marriage existed so that women could have children and have a male who would take care of them. And the EU did not appreciate that and threw him out. But he also, as I say, as a polyglot, spent a lot of time in the late 70s through the 80s and into the 90s in Latin America, largely Argentina, because people there were interested in what was going on in the church at that time. And what was going on in the church at that time was John Paul II. And since he knew Polish and had been in and out of Poland, they wanted to hear about it, especially with all of the Marxism, as is well known, kind of roiling in Latin America. One thing they were interested in was Solidarność, Solidarity, the trade union in Poland, as a popular protest coming from the people against Marxism, which had, allegedly had solved the problem of the worker. But here you have workers saying that it hadn't, and they would like a different solution. And these were Catholics saying it. So that was of interest to the Catholics in Latin America. So he was in and out of there for, 15 years or so, talking with various intellectual figures and churchmen and things about John Paul's papacy and Poland and what was going on with the workers' movement and that kind of thing. And one of those people he knew at that point was Bergoglio, who is now Pope Francis. So he also knew Francis before he was Pope. And it seems wildly improbable that any man could know both John Paul II and Francis before they became Pope. Right. But he did. So he's a man with a wide knowledge of practical politics in Italy and in Europe more broadly. He's a man with a wide knowledge of various cultures around the world and languages. He's been close to what's been going on in the church for many decades now. And he has a very good philosophical formation from one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century.
Right. A man for the job. So I guess maybe to end this, because the point is to sell the book.
Yes.
It seems to me that
buy the book.
If you can't sell a book within half an hour, then you're not selling the book within an hour. Okay. So perhaps to wrap this up, that's the man. That's why he is quite qualified. And in fact, I think having read the book twice now, can say quite successfully, articulates the argument that there is another modernity, that it lives and breathes among us, and then it has something wonderful, really, to teach us, we who struggle with the seemingly inevitable effects of enlightenment, of secularism in the West. And that this is, to some extent, Pope Francis's origin, his foundation, where he's coming from, which is not a postulate. Pope Francis wrote a very extensive introduction to this book.
It's 8 or 9 pages.
Yeah, and he says as much. This is where he is thinking. This is, so I guess to end would really be if we could give a brief insight without taking away the need for people to buy the book in order to get the insight. What is it about this Latin American experience that has universal relevance to the church today? And when I say universal relevance, I mean the universal pontiff is actively applying the theology of peoples as it is developed in Argentina to the church. And I think this is where a lot of it seems obvious, this is where a lot of the drama and misunderstanding of the Francis pontificate comes from, is this sense of, well, we don't know what this is. This is some new thing. This is not a Italian. This is not even a Western European. Because John Paul had a very similar, especially initial reception, where a pope from Poland, we don't know what he's doing. What is he up to? Is he an anti-capitalist? Is this a Marxist?
Coming from behind the Iron Curtain,
the same stuff
language no one speaks.
Exactly. So it seems like we're in a analogous, but not quite the same situation. So what is it exactly that this book and this investigation into a theology of peoples shows us about Francis?
Well, I as you say, there's too much to summarize because it's an entire book.
Yeah.
And it's not a book about Francis, but it is proceeding from the same background as him and trying to explain what this is, in what way this thought is valuable for the whole church. So it kind of does that almost sideways a lot of the time, because Francis is trying to work through what is valuable about this for the whole church, and Buttiglione is too, but they're different people and they're approaching things different ways. But I have personally found Buttiglione's explanations very helpful for understanding statements Francis makes. I mean, I've found that if you read this book closely and then just look at Francis' statements, you will see terms and patterns of thought and things showing up, which before I didn't notice because they just didn't stand out as part of a pattern. But now they do. One thing I would say is that there is, because of the organic sense of being a people that was just there in Latin America from being a people, the various, the Aztecs, the ones we're familiar with. Of course, there were many smaller ones and that sort of thing. And then Christianity coming and binding the whole continent to a larger people. There's an organic sense of belonging to a thing that is moving through history and growing, and in which the Catholic faith is serving to answer questions and the needs of life which the people have. Why did they become Christian to begin with? It's because they had a need of understanding their life in the world, and Christianity said something to them where they said, that answers my question. That helps me live better in my actual situation. And then this is something that just develops over time and grows. And I think that Francis very much has a sense of the church as being in time. And it's not an evolutionary sense of the church merging into some thing we don't know yet, but it's just a sense of human life developing. Everyone has a life. You start young, you get older, you have different difficulties and challenges as you go along, and you learn things that you at least didn't know, and you have to, Christianity says something new to you. And in the same way that, like a good poem or a good book, which you keep coming back to throughout your life, you find more in it than you did before. And so Francis thinks of the church that way, as something which is always giving you more, and something that's embedded in a history and a process of growth. That's certainly one thing.
Yeah, and I felt there's a phrase that Pope Francis often used that causes some consternation, which is reality is more important than ideas. And I found this book to be particularly helpful in understanding not just the phrase itself, but why it's so important to Francis to say that all the time. It's like the idea of the church not as a series of sort of intellectual propositions that have to simply be brought to people, but as a people among peoples, the church as a real group, a real, flesh and blood people being reformed in the church who come from peoples and who accompany, it's like the people of God accompanying the people in some way. This is both
right.
One and the other.
As Buttiglione says, if you have a Christian people, and Christianity is what constitutes it as a people. It's the reason for its belonging, the logic of its being together in its life. Then the people evangelizes itself in its living.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it does it perfectly, but it means it is doing it. And so the reality of the people standing there in front of the pastor is more important than his ideas, not as though his ideas are wrong, but that he can't even communicate the ideas to the people unless he communicates with it in the way it is communicating.
Yeah, it kind of turns back and makes, to my mind, even more sense out of the medieval period, which so often is seen as a static thing, a sort of a static type to be imitated. And I'm certainly guilty of that very often. I read something that they were up to in the Middle Ages and think, yeah, that's what we should just do right now. But one of the things this book has shown me is the way that the church is, I mean, it's a simple thought, I suppose, but it is both lay and clerical. It is both what the laity are doing is developing. They're moving through history and they're changing the world, and that this is a productive and fruitful gift to the church as a whole. It is not just the thing that is to be governed. It is not just the thing that is to be reacted to, but it is an offering of newness. And the church,
it's a real life. Things are coming out of it as it grows.
Which I think we have some understanding of. I mean, you think about like Newman's consulting the faithful in matters of doctrine. And I think when we approach it in the West, we're often tempted to approach this creative church building reality of the laity as needing to be simply translated into the level of ideas. And one of the things this book does really well is it talks about that reality as something that's very lovingly related to the teaching office of the church, to the bishop, who's not there as like a referee for what the laity are doing, but who's actually in a relationship with them and is being evangelized by the laity, even as the laity are being evangelized by him. And that this mutual, almost marriage relationship is both an ideal, but it's also actually something you can see in history.
Right, and it's very like a father and a child.
Right,
you know,
right. That's why I say
child
it's a
is growing,
thought.
and you're proud of what the child is doing. The child needs some correction, obviously, needs instruction, but you also learn things from watching your children.
You don't have the child in advance, like within you, and you're just sort of watching something inevitable play out and then beating it on the head when it's wrong.
It's not like pottery or something where you just make it.
No, the child is a surprise, and you're responding to the surprise. And I think he really, Buttiglione really gives us the ability to appreciate that about the church, and not to pat ourselves on the back, but to, I think, appreciate the laity as a source of power
and to see how, as you say, that you read about the Middle Ages and you say, well, we should just do that now. But he helps us see, I think, how the church is doing that now. There are things coming up out of the laity, and it's not the same things as in the Middle Ages, but the same dynamic is existing.
That's right. And in that sense, it's a very hopeful book. It's a book that I think gives people a path forward, both in their individual life. If you're feeling the kind of deadlock of secularism, the idea that the only horizon in which you can operate is a sort of militant warring against the evils of what's modern by a refuge in what's past, but can never actually be brought to the present in fullness. If that's your position, which is certainly my average Wednesday, I would say, this book is extremely helpful to give some hope. Because we can look at our Christian brothers and see what they're doing and take inspiration and hope from it.
The dynamic is still happening.
Yeah, exactly. And it's got a great cover, which I think we've already established.
It's got a great cover. It's got an introduction by the Pope. It's got an afterword by Andrew Willard-Jones.
It's going to look great on your shelf if you haven't got them. We've got Politics of the Real. We have The Church Against the State. And now Modernity's Alternative, the trifecta. New Polity Press is moving. And
I can say, I think that if you read this book meditatively, you will. I mean, I found that it really altered my outlook on the world and the church, and allowed me to see a lot of things I wasn't seeing before. It's just enriched the way I think about being a Christian and being a part of a society, what I understand the Pope to be doing and where we are now.
We are so excited to have Rocco Buttiglione coming to Steubenville
yes.
to speak at our conference, where he'll rehearse in a new way some of the themes that are in the book, May 29th through 31st. And we're also very excited to steal some of his time and have him on the podcast and let the man speak for himself. So please do look out for that. In the meantime, you can buy the book right now, newpolity.com/press. We'll get you right there. Otherwise, if you're watching this and you're an email subscriber, go back to your inbox. We already told you to buy it. We're ashamed of you for not having bought it yet.
And right now we've got a special pre-order price. So It's cheaper if you buy it now.
I'm about to say special doesn't necessarily mean cheaper. I'm glad you said that. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Bye.